When Edward VII died in 1910, his 6 children were already spread across the royal and noble tapestry of Europe. Some would seize crowns, others would fade into quiet corners. Marriages, tragedies, dynastic shifts, all would shape how history remembers them. But today, their names are seldom on the tip of tongues. Who were they? What paths did they tread? And what lives, if any, carry their legacy forward? In this video, we'll trace from birth to final legacy. Prince Albert Victor, King George V, Princess Louise, Princess Victoria, Queen Maud, and the infant Prince Alexander John. By the end, you'll see not just their fates, but how Edward VII's bloodline still pulses through monarchies and peerages today. Edward VII's children were born into an age of stiff collars, imperial confidence, and dynastic expectation. This is not a sentimental chronicle, but a careful mapping. Birth, ambition, service, alliance, loss, and in some cases, living legacy. Edward VII and Queen Alexandra raised their children in a world where royal blood meant European influence. Born between 1864 and 1871, these 6 children came of age during the height of British imperial power, when marriages were diplomatic tools and royal duties were understood as service to empire and nation. Alexandra, daughter of the Danish king, Christian IX, brought Scandinavian connections to the British throne. Edward, as Prince of Wales for nearly 60 years, understood better than most how royal children could extend British influence across the continent. Each child would be groomed not merely as individuals, but as living ambassadors of the British crown. The royal nursery at Marlborough House and later Sandringham was a place of structured learning and careful preparation. French and German tutors, naval training for the boys, accomplishments in languages for the girls, everything designed to produce royals who could navigate the complex web of European courts. Yet personality would prove as important as preparation. Some children thrived in public roles, others preferred quiet service. Some would marry strategically and ascend to foreign thrones, others would remain steadfastly British. And one would die so young that his story became a footnote to tragedy. The Britain of the 1860s and 1870s expected its royal children to embody duty, dignity, and discretion. What Edward and Alexandra could not predict was how rapidly the world would change around them, and how each child would adapt to challenges their parents could never have imagined. Let's begin with their firstborn, Albert Victor, whose early death would reshape the entire trajectory of the British monarchy. On January 8, 1864, at Frogmore House in Windsor, Prince Albert Victor Christian Edward was born into the greatest expectations the British royal family could bestow. As the eldest son of the Prince and Princess of Wales, he was destined from birth to inherit not just titles but the throne itself. His parents called him Eddie, and from his earliest days he carried the weight of being heir presumptive to the heir presumptive. Albert Victor's childhood unfolded in the privileged cocoon of royal education. Alongside his younger brother George, he was tutored in languages, history, and the social graces expected of future monarchs. Yet even in these early years, observers noted differences between the brothers. Where George was alert and energetic, Albert Victor seemed more languid, more prone to distraction. The family dynamics at Marlborough House placed Albert Victor at the center of attention. Edward VII, still Prince of Wales and chafing under his own mother's reluctance to grant him substantial duties, was determined that his sons would be better prepared for royal service than he had been. This meant rigorous education, but also early exposure to public life. In 1879, the two princes embarked on what would become a defining experience, a 3-year voyage aboard HMS Bacchante. This wasn't merely a pleasure cruise, but a carefully planned educational journey designed to give them practical experience of the world beyond Britain's shores. They visited the Mediterranean, South America, the Falklands, South Africa, Australia, and the Far East. The voyage revealed both Albert Victor's strengths and his limitations. He proved capable of ceremonial duties and showed genuine interest in the cultures they encountered. Yet reports from their tutors suggested he struggled with sustained attention to academic subjects. Whether this reflected learning difficulties, lack of motivation, or simply the challenges of education aboard a ship remains unclear. Upon their return to Britain in 1882, Albert Victor faced the transition from protected royal childhood to adult public responsibilities. He was commissioned as an officer in the 10th Hussars and began the round of military service, public appearances, and ceremonial duties expected of a future king. Contemporary accounts describe a young man who fulfilled his obligations competently but without particular distinction. He was tall, attractive in the fashion of the day, and carried himself with appropriate dignity. Yet privately, his parents and advisors sometimes worried about his readiness for the tremendous responsibilities that awaited him. The 1880s saw Albert Victor gradually assuming more substantial roles within the royal household. He undertook solo tours, including visits to Ireland and the continent, representing his grandfather, Queen Victoria, and his father. These journeys were carefully managed to build his experience while avoiding potential controversies. In 1890, Queen Victoria created him Duke of Clarence and Avondale, a recognition of his maturity and his position as second in line to the throne. The Duke began to develop his own court and household, preparing for eventual independence from his father's establishment. His public activities focused on military ceremonials, charity patronages, and the social functions that maintained royal presence throughout British society. He became patron of various organizations and began to develop relationships with the political and social leaders he would one day need to work with as king. Yet those who knew him privately sometimes expressed concerns. Albert Victor seemed more comfortable with social life than with the serious study of constitutional and political matters. Whether this represented a problem or simply reflected his still developing maturity would never be fully tested. In December 1891, the royal family announced Albert Victor's engagement to Princess Mary of Teck. Mary, known in the family as May, was considered an excellent choice, intelligent, well-educated, and from a family with strong German royal connections that would strengthen British ties to continental Europe. The engagement represented more than personal happiness. It was a crucial step in securing the succession. At 27, Albert Victor needed to marry and produce heirs to ensure dynastic stability. Mary, at 24, was ideally positioned to become a modern queen consort. Wedding preparations began immediately, with a ceremony planned for February 1892. The nation looked forward to celebrating the future king's marriage and the promise of a new generation of royals. But these hopes were shattered by tragedy. In early January 1892, Albert Victor fell ill with influenza during the pandemic that was sweeping across Europe. Despite the best medical care available, his condition deteriorated rapidly. On January 14, 1892, just 6 days after his 28th birthday, Prince Albert Victor died at Sandringham House. The death sent shockwaves through the royal family and the nation. Edward and Alexandra had lost not just their eldest son, but the future king. The succession now passed to Prince George, who had been preparing for a naval career, not a crown. Albert Victor's death proved to be one of those moments that reshapes history. Princess Mary of Teck, after an appropriate period of mourning, was courted by and married Prince George in 1893. She would become Queen Mary, one of the most successful queen consorts in British history. George, thrust into a role he had never expected, proved to be exactly the steady, dutiful monarch the 20th century demanded. The man who became George V navigated World War, constitutional crisis, and social revolution with a competence that might have eluded his older brother. For Edward VII, Albert Victor's death represented both personal grief and dynastic anxiety resolved in unexpected ways. The father, who had worried about his eldest son's readiness for kingship, discovered that his second son possessed precisely the qualities the monarchy would need. Albert Victor left no children, no wife, no lasting impact on policy or politics. Yet his absence shaped everything that followed. His death cleared the path for a king, George V, who would prove ideally suited to guide Britain through its most challenging decades. In the broader narrative of Edward VII's children, Albert Victor represents the fragility of dynastic planning and the unpredictability of human life. His story is brief but crucial. The prince who might have been king, whose early death ensured that someone better suited for the role would take his place. With Albert Victor gone, the mantle passed squarely to his younger brother George, who would transform from spare heir into one of Britain's most respected monarchs. Prince George Frederick Ernest Albert entered the world on June 3, 1865, at Marlborough House, arriving as the second son with all the freedom and burden that position entailed. Unlike his elder brother Albert Victor, George was not born to be king, a fact that would shape his entire early life until tragedy thrust the crown upon him. From his earliest years, George displayed the characteristics that would define his later reign: methodical attention to detail, a strong sense of duty, and an almost compulsive need for order and routine. Where Albert Victor was dreamy and sometimes unfocused, George was alert, practical, and eager to master whatever task lay before him. The brothers' education proceeded in tandem, but their temperaments were markedly different. George showed a natural aptitude for mathematics, navigation, and the practical skills that would serve him well in his chosen career, the Royal Navy. Edward and Alexandra, recognizing their second son's particular strengths, supported his naval ambitions enthusiastically. The 3-year voyage aboard HMS Bacchante proved as formative for George as it was challenging for Albert Victor. While his older brother struggled with the academic components of their floating education, George thrived on the naval discipline and the practical challenges of seamanship. He returned to Britain in 1882 not just as a prince, but as a competent naval officer. January 14, 1892, changed George's life forever. When Albert Victor died, 26-year-old George suddenly found himself heir presumptive to the heir presumptive. The naval career he loved would have to be abandoned for the constitutional and ceremonial duties of a future king. The transition was neither immediate nor easy. George had planned to continue his naval service, possibly achieving flag rank and independent command. Instead, he faced the prospect of courts, parliaments, and the complex constitutional arrangements that governed the British monarchy. Queen Victoria, Edward, and the government's constitutional advisors began George's intensive preparation for his new role. This included not just formal instruction in constitutional law and political procedure, but also the delicate matter of his marriage. Princess Mary of Teck, his deceased brother's fiancée, was considered the ideal bride for the new heir. The marriage arrangement was handled with extraordinary sensitivity. Both George and Mary needed time to grieve Albert Victor and to develop genuine affection for each other. Their courtship, conducted under intense public scrutiny, blossomed into a partnership that would become one of the most successful royal marriages in British history. On July 6, 1893, Prince George married Princess Mary of Teck at the Chapel Royal in St. James's Palace. The wedding represented not just personal happiness, but dynastic recovery from the crisis of Albert Victor's death. Mary brought to the marriage intelligence, dignity, and a deep understanding of royal duty that perfectly complemented George's own methodical approach to his responsibilities. The couple's early years were spent in York Cottage at Sandringham, a surprisingly modest home for future monarchs. Here, they established the domestic routines and family patterns that would sustain them through decades of public service. George continued his military training and began to undertake the ceremonial and administrative duties appropriate to his new status. In 1901, Edward VII's succession to the throne elevated George to Prince of Wales and heir apparent. This transition brought substantially increased responsibilities, a seat in the House of Lords, regular consultations with government ministers, and representation of the Crown at important state functions both in Britain and abroad. George approached these duties with characteristic thoroughness. He studied constitutional precedents, cultivated relationships with political leaders from all parties, and gradually developed his own understanding of the monarchy's role in Britain's evolving democratic system. His naval background proved unexpectedly valuable, providing him with practical experience of command, decision-making under pressure, and the importance of clear communication. When Edward VII died in May 1910, George V inherited not just a crown but a kingdom facing unprecedented challenges. The constitutional crisis over the House of Lords, rising tensions with Germany, labor unrest, and the Irish question all demanded immediate attention from a king still learning his role. George's response to these challenges revealed the wisdom of his careful preparation. Rather than attempting to assert royal prerogatives, he worked to position the monarchy as a stabilizing force above party politics. His meetings with Prime Ministers Herbert Asquith and later David Lloyd George established patterns of consultation that strengthened rather than threatened constitutional government. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 tested every aspect of George's kingship. His German ancestry and family connections, including his cousin Kaiser Wilhelm II, made him a target for public criticism. His response was characteristically decisive. In 1917, he changed the royal family's name from the Germanic Saxe-Coburg-Gotha to the thoroughly English Windsor. This symbolic act represented more than mere public relations. George understood that modern monarchy required active adaptation to changing public sentiment. The king, who had once spoken German with his grandmother Queen Victoria, now deliberately emphasized his British identity and his commitment to British victory in the war. Throughout the war, George and Queen Mary maintained public morale through hospital visits, factory inspections, and constant visibility among their people. The royal family's determination to share in national sacrifice, including rationing at Buckingham Palace, helped maintain public support for the monarchy during Britain's darkest hours. The post-war years brought new challenges: economic depression, social change, and the rise of labor politics. George navigated these difficulties by maintaining strict political neutrality while demonstrating genuine concern for his subjects' welfare. His Christmas broadcasts, begun in 1932, created a new form of royal communication that brought the monarch directly into British homes. George and Mary's marriage produced 6 children who would play crucial roles in 20th century British history. Their eldest son, Edward, later Edward VIII, showed early signs of the restlessness and unconventional attitudes that would ultimately lead to the abdication crisis of 1936. Their second son, Albert, later George VI, initially seemed less likely to inherit the throne, but possessed the steady character that would prove crucial during World War II and the early years of decolonization. Their daughter Mary became a dutiful royal who married into the Yorkshire nobility and maintained family traditions. The younger sons, Henry, Duke of Gloucester, and George, Duke of Kent, served the monarchy faithfully in various ceremonial and administrative roles, while their youngest son, John, died in childhood from epilepsy, a private tragedy that deepened George and Mary's commitment to their surviving children. George took an active interest in his children's education and preparation for royal duties, though he sometimes struggled with the changing attitudes of the younger generation. His relationship with Edward was particularly complex, as he recognized his heir's personal charm and public appeal while worrying about his commitment to royal duty. The king's grandchildren, including the future Elizabeth II, brought new energy to the royal family. George's particular affection for Lilibet, as Elizabeth was known in the family, proved prophetic. Her serious approach to royal duty and her genuine interest in constitutional questions reminded him of his own younger self. George V's 25-year reign established the modern British monarchy's relationship with democratic government and popular culture. His father, Edward VII, had modernized the social aspects of royalty, but George created the constitutional framework that allowed the monarchy to survive and thrive through 2 world wars and massive social change. The relationship between father and son had evolved from Edward's initial disappointment that his more promising heir had died to genuine respect for George's different but equally valuable qualities. Edward's love of ceremony and pageantry was balanced by George's emphasis on duty and service. Together, they created a model of constitutional monarchy that influenced royal houses throughout the world. George's influence on his son and successor, George VI, was profound. The man who had never expected to be king passed on to another unexpected king the lessons he had learned about adapting royal tradition to modern circumstances. This continuity proved crucial during the challenges of Edward VIII's abdication and the subsequent war years. The Windsor dynasty that George established continues to occupy the British throne today. His great-granddaughter Elizabeth II reigned for over 70 years using principles of constitutional monarchy that George had refined. His legacy lives not just in his direct descendants, but in the institutional practices that have allowed the British monarchy to remain relevant and respected in the 21st century. George V's story within the broader narrative of Edward VII's children illustrates how unexpected circumstances can reveal hidden strengths. The second son who became king proved more successful than his elder brother might have been, demonstrating that dynastic success depends not just on birth order, but on character, preparation, and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances. Next, The princess whose life bridged British royalty and Scottish nobility, Louise, who would create her own unique path through the complexities of early 20th century aristocracy. Princess Louise Victoria. Alexandra Dagmar was born on February 20th, 1867, at Marlborough House, the third child and eldest daughter of Edward and Alexandra. From her earliest years, Louise displayed the practical intelligence and straightforward manner that would characterize her entire life. Unlike some royal children who seemed overwhelmed by ceremony and protocol, Louise approached her royal duties with calm competence. Her education reflected the changing expectations for royal daughters in the late Victorian era. While previous generations of princesses had been confined largely to accomplishments like music, drawing, and modern languages, Louise received a broader education that included history, geography, and current affairs. Her tutors noted her particular interest in charitable work and her ability to connect with people from all social backgrounds. As the eldest daughter, Louise held a special position in the family hierarchy. She served as a bridge between her older brothers Albert, Victor, and George, and her younger sisters Victoria and Maud. Her parents often relied on her good sense and diplomatic skills to manage family tensions and coordinate household arrangements. Louise's character development during these formative years revealed qualities that would serve her well in adult life: discretion, loyalty, and an instinctive understanding of when to speak and when to remain silent. These traits made her a valuable confidant to both her parents and her siblings throughout their various personal and public challenges. Louise's marriage in 1889 to Alexander Duff, 1st Earl of Fife, represented a departure from traditional royal matrimonial patterns. Rather than marrying a foreign prince to cement international alliances, she chose a Scottish nobleman who was both wealthy and well-connected within British society. Alexander Duff brought substantial advantages to the marriage beyond his personal qualities. As heir to significant Scottish estates and business interests, he offered Louise the opportunity to play a meaningful role in British rather than foreign society. His family's long history of service to the Scottish crown provided appropriate dignity for a royal marriage without the complications of foreign court protocol. Queen Victoria's decision to create Duff Duke of Fife shortly after the marriage demonstrated royal approval and elevated Louise's status to Duchess of Fife. This elevation was particularly significant because it acknowledged the value of marrying within the British peerage rather than insisting on foreign royal connections. Louise embraced her new role as Duchess with characteristic enthusiasm. She became actively involved in Scottish affairs, supporting Highland culture, education, and economic development. Her patronage of various Scottish charities and her regular residence at Mar Lodge in Aberdeenshire demonstrated genuine commitment to her adopted homeland rather than mere ceremonial involvement. The couple's public appearances struck a balance between royal dignity and Scottish informality that proved popular with both aristocratic society and the general public. Louise's ability to navigate between her royal birth and her Scottish marriage created a model for how British royalty could maintain relevance within changing social structures. Louise and Alexander's marriage produced two daughters, Princess Alexandra, born 1891, and Princess Maud, born 1893. Both daughters were born with the unique status of being granddaughters of the Prince of Wales, while also being heirs to one of Scotland's premier dukedoms. Princess Alexandra, known in the family as Alec, inherited many of her mother's practical qualities along with a strong sense of independence. Her education prepared her for the unprecedented situation of potentially inheriting a dukedom in her own right, a responsibility that few women of her generation faced. Princess Maud, nicknamed Dolly, showed more interest in social life and the arts, but also demonstrated the family's characteristic sense of duty. Both daughters were raised with an understanding that they would need to balance their royal heritage with their Scottish inheritance and the changing expectations for women in the early 20th century. The family's most dramatic shared experience occurred in December 1911, when they were returning from Egypt aboard the SS Delhi. The ship was wrecked off Cape Spartel near Tangier, and all passengers had to abandon ship in terrible weather conditions. The family's survival of this traumatic experience, which resulted in the Duke of Fife's death from pneumonia contracted during the rescue, demonstrated their resilience and mutual support. Following her father's death in 1912, Princess Alexandra succeeded as second Duchess of Fife, while Princess Maud inherited the title Countess of Southesk through her marriage to Charles Carnegie, heir to the Earl of Southesk. These arrangements ensured the continuation of the Fife dignities while creating new connections within the Scottish peerage. The succession arrangements for the Dukedom of Fife represented an innovative solution to the challenge of female inheritance in the British peerage. The special remainder granted when Alexander Duff was created Duke allowed the title to pass through the female line, ensuring that Louise's daughters could inherit and pass on the dukedom. Princess Alexandra's tenure as second Duchess of Fife was marked by careful stewardship of the family's Scottish estates and continued involvement in charitable work. Her marriage to Prince Arthur of Connaught, son of Queen Victoria's third son, brought additional royal connections while maintaining the Scottish focus of the dukedom. When Alexandra died in 1959 without surviving children, the dukedom passed to her nephew James Carnegie, son of Princess Maud and Charles Carnegie. This transition merged the Fife dukedom with the Southesk earldom, creating a powerful combination of Scottish titles and estates. The current Duke of Fife, David Carnegie, third Duke, continues to maintain the family's Scottish connections while adapting to contemporary expectations for hereditary peers. His stewardship of Kinnaird Castle and other family properties demonstrates ongoing commitment to the principles that Louise and Alexander established over a century ago. The Carnegie family's continued prominence in Scottish society, including their involvement in business, agriculture, and charitable work, represents the lasting impact of Louise's decision to marry within the British peerage rather than seeking foreign royal connections. Edward's relationship with Louise was marked by particular affection and pride in her successful adaptation to Scottish society. Unlike some royal fathers who struggled with their daughters' marriages and new loyalties, Edward embraced Louise's Scottish identity while maintaining close family connections. The Prince of Wales's regular visits to Mar Lodge and his genuine friendship with the Duke of Fife demonstrated his approval of Louise's marriage choice. Edward's support for the special remainder provisions that allowed female inheritance of the Fife dukedom showed his recognition that dynastic flexibility could strengthen rather than weaken royal connections. Louise's role as a bridge between royal and aristocratic society proved particularly valuable during Edward's reign. Her connections within Scottish society provided useful political intelligence, while her diplomatic skills helped manage relationships between the royal family and the Scottish peerage. Edward's trust in Louise's judgment was evident in his willingness to consult with her on family matters and his reliance on her discretion in sensitive situations. She served as an unofficial advisor on matters relating to royal protocol, charitable patronages, and the management of family relationships during difficult periods. The success of Louise's marriage and her effective performance as Duchess of Fife validated Edward's belief that royal children could serve the monarchy effectively without necessarily marrying foreign royalty. Her example influenced later royal marriage choices and demonstrated that strategic marriages within the British peerage could be as valuable as international alliances. Louise's story within the broader narrative of Edward VII's children illustrates the possibilities for royal daughters who combine duty with personal fulfillment. Her marriage created lasting connections between the royal family and Scottish society while establishing patterns of charitable and social engagement that influenced subsequent generations. Next in line, the daughter who gave up a public marriage and lived quietly by her family's separate side, Princess Victoria, whose unmarried life concealed significant behind-the-scenes influence on royal affairs. Princess Victoria Alexandra Olga Mary was born on July 6, 1868, at Marlborough House, the fourth child and second daughter of Edward and Alexandra. From her earliest years, Victoria displayed a personality quite different from her siblings, more retiring, more devoted to family, and less interested in the public aspects of royal life. Her education followed the same general pattern as her siblings, with tutors in languages, music, and the social accomplishments expected of a Victorian princess. However, Victoria showed particular aptitude for domestic organization and family management, skills that would prove invaluable throughout her life, though they attracted little public attention. Victoria's position as the middle daughter gave her a unique perspective on family dynamic. She was close enough in age to Louise to share many experiences, yet different enough in temperament to develop her own distinct role within the family hierarchy. While Louise gravitated toward public duties in Scottish society, Victoria found her calling in supporting the private life of the royal family. Her relationship with Queen Alexandra was particularly close. Victoria seemed to intuitively understand her mother's needs and preferences, developing into an indispensable companion who could anticipate Alexandra's wishes and manage the complexities of royal household arrangements with quiet efficiency. As Victoria reached adulthood, the question of her marriage became a subject of considerable speculation within royal circles. Several foreign princes showed interest, and British noble families would have welcomed an alliance with Edward VII's daughter. However, Victoria consistently declined or discouraged these approaches, preferring to remain unmarried and available to support her family. This decision was unusual for a royal princess of her generation, when marriage was typically considered both a personal duty and a diplomatic opportunity. Victoria's choice to remain single required considerable personal strength and family support, particularly given the social expectations of the late Victorian era. Rather than retiring from public life, Victoria carved out her own sphere of influence through charitable patronages and social hosting. She became patron of several organizations focused on women's welfare, education, and health care, using her royal status to advance causes that might otherwise have struggled for recognition. Her charitable work was characterized by the same quiet efficiency that marked all her activities. Victoria preferred to work behind the scenes, organizing committees, coordinating fundraising efforts, and ensuring that royal patronage translated into practical support for worthy causes. She rarely sought public credit for her contributions, content to see projects succeed without personal recognition. Victoria's role as a hostess proved particularly valuable to the royal family. Her ability to manage complex social events, navigate difficult personalities, and create comfortable environments for both family gatherings and official functions made her indispensable during important royal occasions. Victoria's decision to remain unmarried has been the subject of considerable historical speculation. Some suggest she sacrificed personal happiness to care for Queen Alexandra in her later years. Others propose that she simply preferred independence to the constraints of marriage within the rigid social structures of early 20th century aristocracy. Contemporary evidence suggests that Victoria's choice was deliberate rather than circumstantial. She had opportunities for marriage, but consistently chose family duty over personal arrangements. Her correspondence reveals a woman who found satisfaction in her chosen role and who regarded her unmarried status as a form of service rather than sacrifice. Her personal interests extended beyond royal duties to include gardening, interior decorating, and family genealogy. Victoria became the family's unofficial historian, maintaining extensive records of royal events, preserving family correspondence, and documenting the changing patterns of royal life for future generations. Victoria's residences, particularly her apartments at Buckingham Palace and her cottage at Sandringham, became informal gathering places for family members seeking advice, comfort, or simply quiet conversation away from public scrutiny. Her ability to maintain confidences and provide emotional support made her a crucial figure in family crisis management. Her relationship with her nephew George V was particularly close. Victoria served as an unofficial advisor during his early reign, providing insights into court protocol and family traditions that helped him navigate the complexities of kingship. Her knowledge of royal precedent and her understanding of public expectations proved invaluable during constitutional crises. Victoria's influence on royal family traditions and protocols was profound but largely invisible to public observation. Her meticulous attention to detail in managing family events, her preservation of family documents and photographs, and her role as institutional memory helped maintain continuity during periods of rapid social change. Her charitable work established patterns of royal engagement that influenced subsequent generations. Victoria's emphasis on practical assistance rather than ceremonial involvement created models for effective royal patronage that continue to guide royal charitable work today. The absence of descendants meant that Victoria's direct influence ended with her death in 1935. However, her indirect impact through her support of other family members, particularly George V and his children, helped shape the development of the modern British monarchy in ways that are difficult to measure but impossible to ignore. Victoria's careful preservation of family archives provided invaluable resources for later historians and biographers seeking to understand the private dynamics of the royal family during crucial periods of British history. Her documentation of family relationships, court procedures, and social changes created a record that continues to inform our understanding of royal life. Edward's relationship with Victoria was marked by deep affection and growing respect for her judgment and discretion. Initially, he may have hoped for an advantageous marriage that would create new diplomatic connections, but he came to appreciate the unique value of her continued presence within the family. Victoria's role as Queen Alexandra's primary companion during Edward's many absences for official duties proved crucial to family stability. Her ability to manage Alexandra's increasingly difficult deafness and her skill in maintaining household harmony during stressful periods earned Edward's lasting gratitude. The Prince of Wales frequently consulted Victoria on matters relating to court protocol, family relationships, and social obligations. Her understanding of aristocratic society and her ability to navigate complex personal relationships made her a valuable, informal advisor on matters that required delicate handling. Edward's trust in Victoria's discretion was evident in his willingness to discuss sensitive political and family matters in her presence. She became one of the few people who understood the full complexity of his position as both heir to the throne and head of a large, complicated family with diverse interests and obligations. Victoria's contribution to Edward VII's success as king was largely invisible, but nonetheless essential. Her management of family affairs, her support for Queen Alexandra, and her role in maintaining family unity allowed Edward to focus on his public duties with confidence that private matters were being handled competently. Now we leave Britain for Scandinavia. Maud, who would become a queen abroad and establish a royal dynasty that continues to rule Norway today. Princess Maud, Charlotte. Mary Victoria was born on November 26, 1869, at Marlborough House, the fifth child and youngest daughter of Edward and Alexandra. From her earliest years, Maud displayed the energetic, independent spirit that would characterize her entire life. Her family nickname, Harry, reflected her tomboyish nature and her preference for active pursuits over traditional feminine accomplishments. Maud's education followed the same general pattern as her sisters', but her personality demanded adaptations that reflected her more adventurous temperament. While Louise excelled at diplomatic social interactions and Victoria preferred quiet domestic arrangements, Maud sought physical challenges and showed genuine interest in modern developments like photography, cycling, and travel. Her mother, Alexandra's Danish heritage, proved particularly influential in Maud's development. The princess grew up bilingual in English and Danish, comfortable with Scandinavian culture and customs, and naturally oriented toward the Nordic countries in ways that her siblings were not. This cultural foundation would prove crucial to her later success as Queen of Norway. Maud's relationship with her siblings was marked by genuine affection, but also by recognition of her different interests and priorities. While George pursued naval service and Louise prepared for Scottish society life, Maud seemed drawn to more unconventional possibilities that reflected her generation's expanding opportunities for women. Maud's marriage on July 22, 1896, to Prince Karl of Denmark created what initially appeared to be a conventional royal alliance between British and Danish royal houses. Karl, younger son of the future Frederick VIII of Denmark, offered appropriate royal status without the burden of immediate succession responsibilities. The couple established their residence in Denmark, where Maud adapted successfully to Scandinavian royal society while maintaining close connections to her British family. Her natural affinity for Danish culture, combined with Karl's position within the Danish royal family, created a comfortable arrangement that seemed likely to continue indefinitely. However, European politics would transform this conventional marriage into something extraordinary. The 1905 dissolution of the union between Sweden and Norway created an opportunity for Norwegian independence that would change Maud's life completely. When the Norwegian Parliament offered the crown to Prince Karl, the decision required careful consideration of multiple factors. Karl's acceptability to Norwegian political leaders, his ability to establish constitutional monarchy in a newly independent nation, and Maud's willingness to become queen of a country neither of them had ever ruled. The Norwegian Parliament's choice of Karl was strategic. As a Danish prince, he represented Scandinavian rather than great power influence. His marriage to a daughter of the future Edward VII provided connections to Britain without threatening Norwegian independence. Most importantly, his naval experience and modern outlook suggested he could adapt to democratic constitutional monarchy. Maud's role in accepting the Norwegian crown was crucial, but often underestimated. Her willingness to leave the familiar comforts of Danish royal life for the uncertainties of Norwegian queenship demonstrated both personal courage and political wisdom. She understood that her British connections could benefit Norway, while her Scandinavian heritage would help her connect with her new subjects. When Karl became Håkon VII of Norway in November 1905, Maud faced the unprecedented challenge of establishing queenly roles and protocols in a nation that had not had its own monarch for over 5 centuries. Unlike queens who inherited established traditions, Maud had to create Norwegian royal customs while respecting both democratic principles and Nordic cultural patterns. Her approach to queenship emphasized accessibility, practicality, and genuine engagement with Norwegian society. Rather than attempting to impose foreign royal protocols, Maud studied Norwegian history, learned the language thoroughly, and adapted her public appearances to reflect Norwegian rather than British or Danish expectations. Queen Maud's patronage activities focused on areas where royal support could make genuine differences: hospitals, nursing education, cultural organizations, and charitable institutions serving women and children. Her background in modern royal practices, acquired through her British upbringing, helped her establish effective patterns of royal engagement that strengthened rather than threatened Norwegian democratic institutions. The Queen's public appearances struck a careful balance between royal dignity and Norwegian informality. She learned to navigate the complex relationships between the monarchy, the parliament, and the various political parties that govern Norway's new democracy. Her success in remaining above party politics while demonstrating genuine concern for Norwegian welfare helped establish the legitimacy of the new royal house. Maud's adaptation to Norwegian climate and culture required significant personal adjustments. The informal, outdoor-oriented lifestyle of Norwegian society suited her energetic temperament, and she became genuinely enthusiastic about skiing, hiking, and other activities that connected the royal family to Norwegian national identity. Her ceremonial duties evolved to reflect Norwegian values and traditions rather than copying foreign models. State visits, official receptions, and royal ceremonies developed their own distinctly Norwegian character under Maud's influence, creating traditions that continue to guide Norwegian royal protocol today. Queen Maud and King Haakon's only son, Prince Alexander, was born in 1903 and took the Norwegian name Olav when his father became king. Crown Prince Olav represented the future of Norwegian monarchy, and his upbringing reflected the careful balance between royal dignity and democratic accessibility that his parents established. Olav's education prepared him for constitutional monarchy in a modern democratic state. Unlike princes of earlier generations who were groomed primarily for ceremonial roles, Olav studied politics, economics, and social issues that would enable him to understand and support Norwegian society effectively. The Crown Prince's military service during World War II, when he accompanied his father and the government into exile in Britain, demonstrated the Norwegian royal family's commitment to national independence and democratic government. Their refusal to collaborate with German occupation forces strengthened public support for the monarchy and validated Maud's original acceptance of the Norwegian crown. When Olav succeeded as King Olav V in 1957, he inherited the successful constitutional monarchy that his parents had created. His reign, lasting until 1991, consolidated the Norwegian royal house's position as a respected and effective institution within Norwegian democracy. King Olav's children included Crown Prince Harald, who became Harald V in 1991 and continues to reign today. Harald's marriage to Sonja Haraldsson, a commoner, represented the Norwegian royal family's continued adaptation to changing social expectations while maintaining institutional continuity. The current Norwegian royal family, including Crown Prince Haakon and his children, represents the direct continuation of the line that Maud established when she accepted the Norwegian crown in 1905. Their continued popularity and effectiveness demonstrate the lasting success of her adaptation to Norwegian constitutional monarchy. Edward's relationship with Maud was marked by initial surprise at her unconventional path and growing pride in her success as Queen of Norway. When she first married Prince Karl, Edward expected a conventional life within Danish royal society, similar to that of many other royal daughters who married into foreign courts. The opportunity for Norwegian queenship presented Edward with both diplomatic opportunities and personal concerns. On one hand, having a daughter as Queen of Norway strengthened British influence in Scandinavia and provided useful intelligence about Nordic political developments. On the other hand, he worried about Maud's ability to succeed in such an unprecedented situation. Edward's support for Maud's acceptance of the Norwegian crown demonstrated his understanding of changing European political realities. Rather than insisting on traditional great power arrangements, he recognized that small, democratic nations could be valuable allies and that royal connections could serve British interests in new ways. The correspondence between Edward and Maud during her early years as queen reveals his genuine affection and his practical advice about managing the challenges of constitutional monarchy. His own experience as a modernizing force within British royalty provided useful guidance for Maud's efforts to establish effective royal traditions in Norway. Edward's visits to Norway and his public support for the new Norwegian royal house helped legitimize Haakon and Maud's reign, both domestically and internationally. His endorsement carried significant weight in European diplomatic circles and contributed to broader recognition of Norwegian independence. The success of Maud's queenship validated Edward's belief that royal children could serve monarchical institutions effectively by adapting to local circumstances rather than imposing foreign models. Her example influenced his thinking about the future of constitutional monarchy in an era of democratic expansion and nationalist movements. Maud's story within the broader narrative of Edward VII's children illustrates the possibilities for royal daughters who combine personal courage with political wisdom. Her willingness to embrace an unprecedented opportunity created a lasting dynasty while demonstrating how traditional monarchy could adapt successfully to modern democratic expectations. Finally, the brief, tragic life of his final child, Alexander John, whose story serves as a poignant reminder of infant mortality's impact even on royal families. Prince Alexander John Charles Albert was born on April 6, 1871, at Sandringham House, arriving as the sixth and final child of Edward and Alexandra. His birth came during a period of family happiness and stability, when his parents had already successfully established 5 children in their roles as royal princes and princesses. The family atmosphere in 1871 reflected Edward and Alexandra's growing confidence as parents and their comfortable establishment within the rhythm of royal duties and domestic life. Their older children, Albert Victor at 7, George at 6, Louise at 4, Victoria at 3, and Maud at 1, created a lively household that welcomed the new baby with excitement and anticipation. Alexandra, now experienced with royal childbirth and infant care, approached this 6th pregnancy with the expectation of another healthy child who would grow to take his place among his siblings. The family's previous successes seemed to promise that Alexander John would follow the same pattern of development from royal infant to accomplished prince. Edward's delight in his expanding family was evident in contemporary accounts of Alexander John's birth. The Prince of Wales had found genuine happiness in fatherhood, and each child strengthened his sense of dynasty and continuity. This newest son represented not just personal joy, but another potential asset to the royal family's future. However, it quickly became apparent that Alexander John faced serious health challenges from birth. Born prematurely and struggling with respiratory difficulties, the infant prince required constant medical attention from the moment of his arrival. The best medical expertise available in 1871 was summoned to Sandringham, but the limitations of Victorian medicine became tragically apparent. Despite the devoted care of royal physicians and the anxious attention of his parents, Alexander John's condition deteriorated rapidly during his first day of life. Contemporary medical records suggest that the prince suffered from complications related to premature birth, possibly including underdeveloped lungs or other organ systems that could not sustain life outside the womb. The family's anguish was compounded by their helplessness in the face of medical limitations that offered no effective interventions. On April 7, 1871, just 24 hours after his birth, Prince Alexander John died at Sandringham House. The brief life that had promised to add another branch to Edward VII's growing family tree was over before it had truly begun. Unlike his siblings, Alexander John never had the opportunity to develop a personality, pursue education, or undertake royal duties. His life was too brief for any public role or lasting impact on royal affairs. He exists in family records as a date of birth, a date of death, and a grave marker, a reminder of how fragile life could be even within the protected environment of royalty. The infant prince never received the military commissions, ceremonial appointments, or charitable patronages that marked his siblings' development from childhood to adult royal service. His name appears in genealogical records, but not in the annals of public service or diplomatic achievement. There are no portraits of Alexander John beyond his infancy, no letters in his hand, no record of his preferences or personality traits. He remains a name in the family tree, significant primarily for his absence from the story of Edward VII's children, rather than for any positive contribution to royal history. Alexander John's death represented the kind of personal tragedy that affected Victorian families across all social levels, including royalty. His brief life serves as a reminder that royal privilege could not protect against the medical limitations and infant mortality rates that characterized the late 19th century. For Edward and Alexandra, the loss of their youngest child cast a shadow over their family happiness that never entirely lifted. Contemporary accounts suggest that both parents were deeply affected by the experience of losing a child, and that this grief influenced their relationships with their surviving children. The emotional impact of Alexander John's death may have contributed to Alexandra's protective attitude toward her remaining children and Edward's particular attention to their health and welfare throughout their development. The knowledge that royal birth offered no guarantee of survival made their other children's successful maturation seem more precious and less certain. Alexander John's relationship with Edward VII was limited to a single day, but represented the hopes and fears that accompanied every royal birth. Edward's joy at his son's arrival and his devastation at the infant's death illustrated the personal emotions that lay behind the public facade of royal family life. The grief of losing Alexander John may have deepened Edward's appreciation for his surviving children and strengthened his determination to prepare them effectively for their royal roles. The fragility of life that Alexander John's death demonstrated made the successful development of Albert Victor, George, Louise, Victoria, and Maud seem more remarkable and more valuable. In the broader context of Edward VII's family story, Alexander John represents the unpredictability of dynastic planning and the personal costs that accompanied royal privilege. His brief presence in the family reminded everyone that royal blood offered no protection against life's fundamental uncertainties. Now, stitching the threads together, we can see how Edward VII's vision for his progeny played out across the generations, creating legacies both expected and surprising. When we trace the descendants of Edward VII's children into the 21st century, the patterns that emerge reveal both the success and the limitations of dynastic planning. 3 of his 6 children established lasting legacies that continue to influence European royalty and British aristocracy today. George V's line dominates this legacy through the continued British monarchy. His great-great-granddaughter Elizabeth II reigned for over 70 years, and her son Charles now sits on the throne as Charles III. The Windsor dynasty that George established has weathered world wars, constitutional crises, and social revolutions, while maintaining its position as one of the world's most respected constitutional monarchies. Maud's Norwegian legacy proves equally enduring. Her great-great-grandson Harald V currently reigns as King of Norway, and his son Crown Prince Haakon represents the 5th generation of Norwegian royalty descended from Edward VII. The Norwegian royal house that Maud helped establish has become a model of successful constitutional monarchy in a modern democratic state. Louise's contribution lives on through the Carnegie family's continued prominence in Scottish society. The current Duke of Fife, David Carnegie, maintains the Scottish estates and traditions that Louise and her husband established, while their descendants continue to play significant roles in British aristocratic and charitable life. Victoria's unmarried life ended her direct influence with her death in 1935, but her indirect contributions to royal institutional development continue to influence how the monarchy approaches family relationships, charitable work, and the preservation of royal traditions. Albert Victor and Alexander John left no descendants, yet their absence shaped everything that followed. Albert Victor's death cleared the path for George V's successful reign, while Alexander John's brief life reminded the family of mortality's unpredictability. Edward's hopes for his children reflected the expectations of his era: sons who would serve the crown and empire, daughters who would create diplomatic alliances, and grandchildren who would extend British influence across Europe. Some of these ambitions were fulfilled beyond his expectations, while others were transformed by historical circumstances he could never have predicted. The idea of modern constitutional monarchy that Edward pioneered found its fullest expression in his son, George V's reign. The balance between royal dignity and democratic accessibility that Edward sought became the foundation for the Windsor dynasty's long-term success. His daughter Maud's queenship achieved something Edward likely never imagined: the establishment of a new royal house that strengthened rather than competed with British interests. Her success demonstrated that royal daughters could serve monarchical institutions effectively by creating rather than merely joining royal families. Louise's marriage within the British peerage proved that strategic domestic alliances could be as valuable as international royal connections, while Victoria's unmarried devotion to family showed that royal service could take many forms beyond the traditional patterns of marriage and childbearing. The story of Edward VII's children illustrates how individual character, historical circumstance, and personal choice combine to shape dynastic outcomes in ways that no amount of careful planning can entirely predict. Some children who seemed destined for greatness died young, while others who appeared to face conventional paths created unprecedented opportunities. Behind the great names and formal titles lie human stories of adaptation, sacrifice, triumph, and loss. Albert Victor's early death cleared the way for his brother's successful reign. George's unexpected kingship created the modern British monarchy. Louise balanced royal duty with personal fulfillment. Victoria chose family service over marriage. Maud embraced a foreign crown and made it Norwegian. Alexander John's brief life reminded everyone of mortality's unpredictability. These 6 lives mirror the broader transitions of their era: the movement from Victorian certainties to 20th century adaptations, from imperial confidence to constitutional democracy, from rigid protocol to flexible engagement with changing societies. Today, over a century after Edward VII's death, his bloodline continues to pulse through European monarchies and British aristocracy, but not always in the ways he might have expected. The children who seem most conventional sometimes achieved the most, while those who appeared destined for quiet lives sometimes created the most lasting changes. Their collective story reminds us that behind every royal dynasty lie individual human decisions about duty, sacrifice, ambition, and love. Decisions that continue to shape the world long after those who made them have passed into history.